Chapter 10. Kansas Sucked. Chapter 11. In the interest of transparency, I should admit that I'd held ill feelings toward the 34th state dating back long before my front tire ever crossed the Colorado-Kansas line, and that prejudice may have colored my experience. It was entirely possible that, given my paranoia because of my bike's latest breakdown and my dislike of the state's more archaic beliefs, it made Utah look like San Francisco, I rolled into Kansas with a negative mentality that bled into my interactions with people and places. It's also possible that Kansas is an old Indian word for asshole factory. I didn't like Kansas because it had been exporting its own special brand of crazy for over 100 years, dating at least back to Carrie Nation. If that name doesn't ring a bell, it's because you also slept through 8th grade American history. To refresh middle school memories, Carrie Nation was the crazy woman with a hatchet who wasn't named Lizzie Borden. From Medicine Lodge, Kansas, Nation was a 6-foot-tall, 175-pound woman who came to fame in the early 1900s by charging into saloons armed with a hatchet, a purse filled with rocks, and intolerance. Once she'd pushed her way inside, she hacked up tables, barrels of beer, bottles of booze, individual rights, and any semblance of fun, which in Kansas was already an endangered species. Her hatred of alcohol probably stemmed from her marriage to and divorce from an alcoholic, and like all other completely rational people who force their version of morality on the rest of us filthy heathens, because God told her to. Before anyone gets offended, I should point out that I'm not an atheist. I think atheists are just vegans who eat meat. You can't be around either without them announcing their veganism, atheism, and pointing out how much better they are than you. I'm a New England Irish Catholic, which means I'm Catholic enough to have a Protestant ex-girlfriend tell me she'd never have my children, but not Catholic enough to get into heaven. Nation called herself a bulldog running along at the feet of Jesus, barking at what he doesn't like, and apparently Jesus really didn't like alcohol. He must have had a change of Sacred Heart since his water into wine phase. As if it weren't bad enough that Nation broke up bars in Kansas, she invaded other states, smashing and vandalizing legally operating, privately owned businesses because she didn't agree with the products they sold. While she didn't live long enough to see prohibition enacted as law, through her speeches, newsletters, and violent illegal acts of destruction against private property, she was a major force in getting the Constitution amended to protect Americans from the evils of personal freedom. Making booze illegal did little to curtail drinking, as a weekend among American teenagers could tell you, but it did help create and strengthen the modern mafia, cause countless deaths, increase cases of blindness from people drinking poisonous booze distilled in bathtubs and back rooms, trample individual rights, turn Americans into criminals, waste tax money, increase corruption at the local, state, and federal levels, and give us the Kennedys. While most states would, at the very least, be embarrassed by a connection to such things, Kansas embraced them with the fervor of a dog mounting an unsuspecting leg. They celebrated all those fine achievements by turning Nation's Medicine Lodge house located on Route 160 into a museum. Ideally, the lessons of Carrie Nation and the dangers of forcing beliefs onto other people would have stuck with Kansans. But a little more than a century after her death, the Sunflower State's most famous export was once again intolerance and hate, this time in church form. The Westboro Baptist Church, based out of Topeka, Kansas, continually made national news because its pastor and church members fervently believed that the creator of the universe, a compassionate being of pure light and love, was actually a raging douchebag homophobe. I'm paraphrasing here. They believed that God hated homosexuality and punished America for its tolerant stance on gays. They expressed this conviction by protesting in public spaces with signs that read, among other things, God hates fags and God hates America. In reality, God didn't hate gays, America, or people who wore plaid. He didn't hate anyone, except perhaps self-righteous assholes who marched around waving signs in public. Unless those signs were advertising $5 footlong sandwiches, he was fine with that. Fortunately, the church only had around 40 members, as most people had more faith in their God than to believe he was a closed-minded asshole. Unfortunately, by the church's own accounts, those 40 members were enthusiastic in their vitriol. Having done over 41,000 pickets, including daily picketing in Topeka, among their favorite protest targets were the funerals of fallen soldiers because they believed that God allowed American servicemen to be killed because he was angry at the American government for accepting homosexuality, a rather vague and roundabout punishment even by Old Testament standards. Nothing much could be done to stop the picketing because the Constitution's freedom of speech clause, which those same soldiers protected with their lives, allowed the church to protest at those funerals. But the WBC didn't limit its hatred for gays. Over the years, the church had come out against other Protestant churches, Jewish institutions, the American military, the Catholic Church, Hinduism, Islam, Michael Jackson, Apple, the President of the Church of Latter-day Saints, China, India, and seemingly everything under the sun other than the Westboro Baptist Church and inbreeding. To be fair, Kansas probably had some good things going for it. None immediately come to mind. But those good things were easily overshadowed by a tradition of wandering hate-mongers. When my pre-existing distaste for the state that brought us Carrie Nation in the Westboro Baptist Church was combined with temperatures north of 100 degrees and my rediscovered paranoia that I might break down at any moment, thus forcing me to spend more time in Kansas, my day in Kansas felt more like a month in hell. With nothing to do but dwell on the fear of another bout of vapor lock, I followed Route 160, a road so straight and flat it had to be designed by sadists, or engineers building the safest, fastest, and most fuel-efficient roads possible. Because of the heat, I wouldn't allow myself to ride more than 80 miles without stopping to top off my gas tank, grabbing a drink, and leaving the bike to cool in whatever shade I could find. To keep myself from a paranoia-induced nervous breakdown, I distracted myself by reading the anti-abortion billboards peppering the landscape. Pro-life slogans sprouted from farm fields like so much wheat. Homemade signs were bolted to weathered split-rail fences, and every car I passed was adorned with at least one pro-life bumper sticker. My favorite cars had the right-wing combination of pro-life, pro-gun, and anti-Obama/Clinton, or what I like to think of as the other red state holy trinity. Such a profusion of politically inspired trunk art reminded me of yet another state that I hated spending time in, Massachusetts. Granted, they were at different ends of the political spectrum. While Kansas tailgates were disproportionately dedicated to questioning President Obama's birthplace, his belief in the Quran, and whether or not he was a Soviet robot created to destroy democracy, in the Bay State, almost every rear end demanded you keep your rosaries off the driver's ovaries, not engage in war for oil, and impeach Bush, despite the fact he hadn't been president for years. In both states, you couldn't get a cheeseburger without being assaulted with political ideology in 6 words or less, and it has always been my firm belief that if you could sum up your political beliefs in a bumper sticker, you should probably shut the fuck up. Such diametrically opposed states, both having a fixation on billboard bumper sticker logic, got me thinking about the state of politics in America. Normally, on a motorcycle, thinking about anything other than the road ahead wasn't a good idea, but with so few curves, Route 160 was a good place for distracted driving. I thought about how hypocritical both parties were. The Republicans believed that government ought to stay the hell away from citizens' God-given rights, unless those rights didn't line up with the, quote, core principles of, quote, real America, like smoking weed or having sex with someone of the same gender, in which case there wasn't a hole deep enough to throw them. Democrats believed that the government would crush its citizens' civil and human rights with racist, sexist, and homophobic laws, and the only way to ensure that this didn't happen was to give the government more power and to force it deeper into people's everyday lives. Making matters worse was the fact that both sides had logical, well-founded points, and both sides had ridiculous ideas that only made sense to people who'd taken 16-penny nails to their frontal lobes. If you elected a Republican for his conservative economic views, you also had to deal with his belief that legalizing gay marriage would cause the earth to wobble off its axis and plunge into the sun, which may or may not cause climate change. If you voted for a Democrat for her environmentally friendly stance, then you couldn't be surprised when she created a federal SWAT team tasked with making sure people ate their vegetables and didn't use too many squares of toilet paper. It was as if America was a restaurant that only served 2 dishes, steak with a side of dog shit or salad with a side of cat shit, no substitutions. By far, the most depressing aspect of American politics was that the 2 parties that had 100% of the power only represented, at most, 20% of the population. They'd have you believe that the entire country was torn between conservative and liberal, blue and red, Mounds and Almond Joy. But most of the people I knew weren't true believers in one political vein. Most people were a little red and a little blue, a little left and a little right, 60% water and 40% other. Their beliefs on specific issues didn't get passed down from some grand political ideal, they came from thinking. What would solve a lot of problems was a viable third party, one that actually represented the 80% of the population that the Republicans and Democrats ignored. It could be called the Sane Party, and instead of a donkey or an elephant, its symbol could be a brain, and its tagline would be, "Vote John Doe, vote sane," which would make for a great bumper sticker. To start, it would throw its support behind any logical laws put forth by either Republicans or Democrats and block any of their insane. Once it had enough seats in Congress, it could set congressional term limits, get rid of lifetime pay for congressmen, re-legalize pot, not allow congressmen to make profits off insider information, simplify the legislative process so unrelated and harmful riders couldn't get attached to otherwise solid law, reaffirm that guns are inanimate objects and therefore not evil, and tweak the First Amendment so that protesting at funerals was punishable with death by crotch kicking. In my humble opinion, the Constitution could use far more references to blunt crotch trauma. The potential of the Sane Party had me inspired. Maybe that's what I should do when I get back to New Hampshire. I could stop spending my time making up stories and try to change America's political culture. Who are you kidding? By this time next year, you'll be pounding nails for $10 an hour and wishing you had health care because that mole on your neck kinda looks funny. Why can't I? American history is filled with stories of common people coming out of nowhere to change the country for the good. And you believe those stories? How cute. It's just not possible. It would require tons of money, and you made $10,500 a year for the last 3 years. That leaves the lottery or bank robbery as your only options. You're forgetting about the power of the internet. With the help of the internet and the ability to articulate the logical and beneficial outcome of a Congress that actually represents the people, I think I could help make it happen. So you're gonna dedicate yourself to becoming a blogger? What if we skip that step and jump right to living in a shack in the woods and cranking out a manifesto? If it's well written and thought-provoking, then people will read it. That's the egalitarian nature of the internet. It's a powerful tool for the exchange of ideas. It's a marketplace for homemade porn. It can be both, but I can really do some good, just like those protesters in the Middle East who used Twitter and Facebook to rebel against their governments. Did you just compare your middle-class American ass to political protesters risking arrest, torture, decades in prison, and eventual death to speak out against murderous, tyrannical dictatorships? And I thought I was the asshole of this personality. I didn't mean it like that. You know, now that I think of it, you wouldn't be the first person to ride his motorcycle on a long trip and become inspired to devote his life to politics. The first guy rode around South America, spent some time in Cuba, and finally ended up in Bolivia. Didn't turn out so well for him in the end, though. After he was executed, his hands were chopped off at the wrist and mailed to Fidel Castro. Could you not compare me to a communist terrorist? Why not? You have such similar splotchy beards. It wasn't all bad for him, though. He did get to end up on a lot of hipster t-shirts. Forget it. Let's just find lunch. Good idea, because I hate to be the one to tell you this, but you're nowhere near t-shirt pretty. I pulled into a gas station on the outskirts of a little farming town. After topping off my tank, I went inside to see if the clerk could point me to a good place to eat. Whenever inside a convenience store with their aisles of neon-colored foodstuffs, I couldn't help but wonder what future civilizations will think when they dig up this last reminder of 21st century America. With the sheer numbers and distribution of gas and gulps, park and goes, 7-Elevens, marathon stations, and stinker marts, it's pretty likely that at least a couple will survive whatever civilization-ending event wipes us all from the face of the earth. 1,000 years from now, teams of archaeologists will brush dust away from the automatic sliding doors of some long-buried gas and gulp to reveal the inside as perfectly preserved as King Tut's tomb. The vacuum-sealed plastic packaging and artificial preservatives might even allow these future generations to experience such modern-day delicacies as chili cheese Cheetos and spicy lard dip. Based on what they'll find, future archaeologists would have to theorize that we were all morbidly obese, worshipped tiny boxes of tube tobacco held behind altars, and died from scurvy because of a total lack of fruits and vegetables. 2 out of 3 of those theories actually sounded about right. Meanwhile, in modern-day Kansas, a skinny teenager in a white t-shirt and the hat of a football team located halfway across the country manned the counter. A hot dog machine sat near the register, perched between a plexiglass scratch ticket display and a vase sprouting an arrangement of 2-foot-long beef jerky. "Any place around here to eat?" I asked the kid. "Sure is," he said, and without a second's hesitation pointed at the automatic hot dog cooker with its skin-toned tubes of processed meat perpetually rolling in their own secretions. Even as hungry as I was, they looked more like mummified cat turds than anything fit for human consumption. It's not exactly what I'm looking for. "What? You got something against our hot dogs?" he asked, his eyebrows scrunching down to show how serious an insult he considered this to be. At first, I thought he was joking, but then I remembered this was Kansas, the only state in the Union where possession of a sense of humor was a Class A felony. I was actually thinking more along the lines of a place I could get off my bike for a little bit, maybe sit down and eat, I said. "You can sit right there." He gestured to a couple of plastic molded chairs propped next to the little red metal vending machines that spat out a handful of broken M&Ms for a quarter. "I'm just not really a hot dog kind of guy," I said, trying not to offend him. "We do burgers too," he said less than helpfully. A blackened grill sat waiting beneath a rack of little green tree air fresheners, their once clear plastic packages smoky with grease. Why he was pushing his gas station fare was beyond me. Maybe he made commission for each tube of ground up snouts and assholes he sold. "I'm just not really looking to eat in a gas station today," I said. "Why not?" The thought that someone might actually turn down a meal marinated in 93 octane fumes was beyond him. "Anything we got here's better than whatever you're going to find in town." He flicked his thumb backward toward Main Street. "Guess I better try the next town then," I said, and walked out the door. 20 minutes later in the next town, I skipped the gas station entirely for fear they'd try to feed me a bag of Doritos and half a tray of Fig Newtons, and drove straight down the main drag looking for lunch. Small storefronts like a barber shop, general store, and insurance company lined both sides of the street, but only one appeared to serve food. It'd been my experience that any small-town restaurant that held a monopoly on food service wasn't going to be much to write home about, but I was too hungry to keep riding. The inside of the diner looked like the saloon scene in an old western, and not just because of all the 10-gallon hats. As soon as the door dinged shut behind me, every head in the place turned in my direction. I stood just inside the door, my pack clinging to my back and my coat over one arm. After weeks of wearing the same clothes, bug wings and thoraxes had become permanently glued to my t-shirt's chest, and the black ring around my collar was thick enough to look like it'd been part of the design instead of made of grit and neck oil. All conversation inside the diner stopped. Even the sound of forks scraping across plates went away. It could have only been better if a piano player had been banging away at the keys only to suddenly stop when I stepped onto the rubber welcome mat. No sign told me to seat myself, and no hostess greeted me with a menu clutched to her chest, so I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. I stood in the doorway waiting for someone to give me a hint, but none of the faces staring back at me looked overly helpful or friendly. Finally, a man carrying a plate of something fried walked by, and I said, "Excuse me, is it just seat yourself for..." He eyed me for a long time without saying anything. It was the longest, serious look I'd ever been a part of that didn't end with a punch. Finally, he said, "Yeah, it is," with the same tone he might use to tell me to go fuck myself. Not sure what the issue was, I found an empty table, dropped my pack into the spare seat, and threw my jacket over the back of the chair. I sat down, wiped the back of my hand through my beard sweat, and it hit me. I understood what the sudden static was about. Everyone in the diner was clean-shaven with clean clothes and a sharp haircut, even if it was hidden under a giant, ridiculous cowboy hat. I, on the other hand, was covered in bits of dead bug, with a Cuban guerrilla fighter's beard, hair in need of a barber, and, with my giant pack, must have looked like something out of Woodstock to these people. The thought made me smile. I was having my own little Easy Rider moment here, the Deep South replaced by the Midwest. The fact that my appearance was getting so many hard looks surprised me. This was farm country, and before my stints in academia and wearing a hard hat, I'd actually been a farmer. In all the time I'd spent working on a farm back east, nobody ever cared what I looked like as long as I wasn't bleeding and the work got done. Apparently that wasn't the case in Kansas. With the waitresses doing their best to avoid acknowledging my existence, I passed the time reading the backs of the artificial sweetener packets. The three waitresses grouped together around the coffee machine, holding a conversation that required them to take turns throwing quick glances my way. Finally, the oldest waitress broke away and made her way to my table. She made no attempt to hide the fact that she wasn't too thrilled to be serving some filthy hippie covered in dead bugs and probably in need of a shower, though for the record, I'd actually taken one at the old lady's sheep motel the night before. It didn't matter how many yes ma'ams, no ma'am, please ma'am, thank you ma'ams I threw at her, nothing was going to change her opinion. She was committed to only communicating with throat grunts, and eyed me when I asked where the bathroom was. No doubt she assumed I wanted to snort drugs in the shitter, when in reality, I just wanted to wash 200 miles worth of road grime out from between my fingers. I ate quickly and left a bigger tip than the food and service deserved. At the time, I thought that would teach them something about not judging people by their appearance, but in retrospect, if they bothered to give it a second thought, I'm sure they thought it was just drug money. I left the diner happy to return to those dull straight roads and the potential of breaking down if it meant not having to deal with people in that godforsaken state. For the rest of the day, I rode only stopping for fuel until just before twilight when I found a campground on a lake outside of Independence, Kansas. It was a good-sized collection of campsites, well-maintained, with RV hookups and playgrounds. Running water and washing machines, not that I used them, were a change of pace from most of the places I'd stayed, with their pit toilets and cougar warnings. I threw up the tent, by this time I was a pro, and starving, set the water to boil for another oatmeal dinner. In a few minutes, I'd mixed the packets into their paste form and sat with the scorching bowl of mush in front of me. I frowned. It'd been almost 8 hours since I'd stopped at the state's friendliest diner, and my stomach was doing its best to crawl inside itself. Still, the steaming bowl of mush was about as appetizing as a bucket of steaming horse apples. My normal dislike of oatmeal had been multiplied exponentially by the temperature and the fact that I'd had nothing but mush for dinner since Moab. Despite the sun setting, it was still in the high 90s, and a film of sweat covered my entire body. Ingesting a pile of hot anything felt like torture, only worse because it was self-inflicted. I felt like the character in a hostage movie who gets handcuffed to a radiator and has to hacksaw through his own wrist to escape. I managed to choke down 3 big spoonfuls without a problem, but when I tried to put the 4th in my mouth, I gagged. Taking a couple of deep breaths through my nose, my favorite "I've done too many Irish car bombs" trick, I tried the spoon again. This time I gagged harder. My eyes watered. I coughed. A bit of the already swallowed oatmeal shot into the back of my mouth, and I spent the next 5 minutes trying to spit away the taste of partially digested Quaker oats. It turns out there was a reason that Quaker didn't offer a flavor called apples, cinnamon, and stomach acid. Accepting defeat, I walked into the woods until I was 50 yards from my campsite and scraped the remainder of the paste out onto the forest floor. Back at the campsite, I tucked my remaining oatmeal packets into the tent bag, stuffed it under a rock, and crawled inside my tent, still hungry. Later that night, I woke to the sound of something moving around just outside the tent. Rustling leaves, scuffed gravel, more dead leaves, more gravel. It was as if something stalked the perimeter. From the sound it made as it circled my tent, I knew it was bigger than a field mouse and smaller than a water buffalo, but beyond that I had no clue. Sounds could be misleading, especially at night. A squirrel playing in dry leaves could sound as big as a bear, and a 200-pound deer could pass within 10 feet of me and I'd never know. Whatever it was stopped moving. The sudden silence was broken only by the sound of me mouth-breathing as I concentrated on the darkness. Quiet but unmistakable, the sound of a claw on fabric, of something hard and sharp scraping against something flimsy and man-made, filled my ears. Possibilities ran through my mind. Bear, mountain lion, bear, mountain lion, bear, lion, shit! As quietly as possible, I flicked open my pocket knife, and with the little 3-inch blade in my hand, I immediately felt 0.00005% better. I knelt, knife in one hand, cheap flashlight in the other, listening to whatever it was tear at the fabric. And the fabric was tearing a lot, the sounds of tentative pawing replaced by the confident rip and shred. I couldn't tell where the sound was coming from because of the acoustics inside the tent, so I continually pivoted, trying to guess the sound's location. I wanted to at least be crouching in the right direction when a single claw sliced a slit into the thin fabric and a monstrous, carnivorous head popped through the opening. I hoped that I could at least stab whatever it was in the eye before it ate me. That way I'd be dead, but at least it'd spend the rest of its life with shitty depth perception. In the little light inside the tent, I scanned through my handful of belongings, looking for anything that might make a good weapon. I already had my knife, but what I wanted was something big, heavy, and club-like. Actually, what I really wanted was something heavy, metal, and gun-like, but I knew that wasn't a possibility. All I had was a notebook and a pen, which would have been great help if I wanted to haiku something to death. Crouching with a death grip on my knife, ready to drive it into something from my nightmares, it struck me that the tent wasn't moving. With all the scratching and tearing of fabric, it should have been jerking and twitching like it'd been caught in a tornado, but it was completely still. Slowly, my adrenaline faded, and it dawned on me that what I heard wasn't the tent getting torn, but the tent bag that I'd left outside under that rock with its remaining 6 packets of oatmeal stuffed inside. One of the cardinal sins of camping was to bring food into your tent. To avoid a, quote, negative encounter, after eating, you were supposed to lock up all leftover food in a car or hang it from a tree. Since I didn't have a car or rope, every night I'd put the rest of my oatmeal packets into the bag my tent came in and weigh it down the best I could with a rock or log. This was another cardinal sin, but having to choose between food inside the tent and food outside the tent, I went with further away from my sleeping body. The tearing sounds that had me so on edge came from something sharp-toothed and furry discovering my oatmeal cache. Realizing that whatever was outside wasn't trying to eat me, I shifted from panic mode to decision mode. Namely, I had to decide whether I should burst out of the tent in an attempt to scare it off, or if I should just let it have the heart-healthy mush. Still clutching my knife and flashlight, I debated. Okay, I'm gonna jump out there and scare it away. Hell no, what if it's a bear or a cougar? It's not a cougar. How do you know that? Because Kansas isn't cool enough to have cougars, and mountain lions don't eat oatmeal. I'll grant you the former, but I'm not sure about the latter. It's probably a raccoon. Or a bear. It's either a raccoon or a possum, or a bear. I'm not afraid of a 15-pound raccoon. What about a 15-pound raccoon that has rabies? I'm just going to go out there with the flashlight, clapping and yelling. It'll just run into the woods. What if it charges? I'll punt the fucking thing. That actually sounds like fun, but you should just stay in the tent. I don't want to have to tell my brother that I was crouching in this tent while a raccoon ran away with his tent bag. So lie. Tell him you slept through the whole thing. I've got to do something before it gets away with the food. You really want to wrestle a cougar over 6 packets of Quaker Oats? You don't even like that shit. It's not a cougar. It's just oatmeal. It can have all the oatmeal it wants. Hell, I'll go to the store in the morning and buy it more. That's it. I'm doing something. Still crouching in the dark with one hand on the door zipper, I stage coughed twice. What the fuck was that? I coughed. Now it knows I'm awake and it'll run away. This way I don't even have to go outside. Or it thinks you're sick. Mountain lions prey on the weak and sick. Do you remember nothing from zoo books? Eventually the sounds outside stopped, but that didn't stop me from spending the better part of an hour straining in the dark to hear them. Finally convinced that my nighttime visitor had disappeared, I managed to fall back asleep. The next morning, I crawled out of my tent to find the bag missing from beneath the rock. I looked around my campsite and the neighboring sites, finding nothing, and then walked into the woods. There was almost no underbrush, so it was easy to spot the shredded blue fabric 20 yards away. The entire length of the bag had been slashed open so cleanly that it looked like it had been done with a scalpel. I picked up the torn, empty oatmeal packets and the ruined tent bag and dropped them into the nearest animal-proof trash can. After cleaning up the mess, I threw all my gear in my pack and jumped on my bike looking for the state line. I didn't even bother eating breakfast until I crossed into Missouri. With Kansas finally behind me, I couldn't help but feel a little relieved. As far as I was concerned, the hatchet wielders, funeral picketers, and raccoons could have it.